Welcome to the Currency of Grief, the podcast where we confront two of society's most taboo topics, death and money. My name is Justin Weidenfeld, and I'm here to serve as your grief financial officer, guiding you through the complex and emotional journey of what happens when money and mortality collide. Whether you're navigating the aftermath of losing a loved one, looking for practical advice on handling pre- and post-death planning, or simply just wanting to start those hard conversations about legacy while you still can, this space is for you. Together, we'll hear real-life stories from real-life people who have navigated the intersection of grief and money and come out the other side. Our guests will share their stories, practical insights, valuable advice, and moments of clarity so that none of you have to navigate this alone. I'm grateful you've decided to join us on this journey. Now let's dive in. So without further ado, let's meet our guests for today's podcast. I am humbled and honored to be in the virtual studio with Richard Wood. Richard is a father, husband, and grandfather whose life was forever changed by a series of profound loss. In just a few short years, Richard lost his 22-year-old son, Spencer, his mother, and his father. But this conversation isn't just about loss. It's about love, resilience, and the ways grief reshapes everything: our faith, our relationships, and even our financial decisions. Richard's story is one of heartbreak, but also of legacy, how he continues to honor Spencer through scholarships, service, and connection. This is a conversation about what it means to keep going when everything changes. So Richard, thank you so much for joining me on the Currency of Grief today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Peter introduced us, Peter Johnson, and I was super grateful that he did. It's always nice to meet somebody from a friend of the podcast and a past guest. But when Peter, shared about the podcast and about me, and then when we talked, what made you want to come on the podcast and share your story?
Well, partly because of Peter's suggestion, but also, my journey through grief has been one where it's now been coming up on 20 years this summer since my son passed away. And I started out attending Compassionate Friends meetings, which is a worldwide organization for parents that lose children. There are 4 chapters here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I learned so much. But the first thing I learned was that there is simply no connection with any priest, counselor, best friend, family member like the connection with another parent that's lost a child. It's just amazing. And in Compassionate Friends, they have monthly meetings, and they're just a wonderful organization. One of the great things they say is a grief shared is a grief halved. So it's just so important to be able to talk, but it's so hard for people grieving to find people that they can talk to. Our loss was what is known as a sudden, unexpected loss. Spencer was a senior at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Had a wonderful life. He was out at the beach nearby late one evening, and he missed a ride home, so he was walking over to a friend's apartment. And it was dark. There was no moonlight, no street lights. And he missed this path that he was supposed to turn on. And he stumbled and fell down an embankment, and he should have been fine. But at the bottom was a concrete drainage ditch, and he fell and hit his head and had a gash back here and a subdural hematoma. And they didn't find him for 12 hours. So when 2 police officers show up at your door, and one's a female and one's a male, you have no idea what they're there to tell you. But in the world of grief, there's a saying that there are 2 calendars in our lives. And the first calendar is the moment that child is born, or that person up until the moment they die. And the second calendar is from that moment forward. And that's totally true in the lives, because when those 2 police officers showed up and told us that what had happened with Spencer, I like to describe the moments thereafter as kind of being on the set of a combination Rod Serling, Alfred Hitchcock show or movie, and you're walking around that set when it's all going on around you in black and white, and but it's part of you, and you're trying to understand what's happening. Um, and after the police came, then I had to get on the phone with a detective um, down in San Luis Obispo and deal with all that. So, it was amazing. When I say amazing, that's probably the wrong description, but it was the beginning for me of our journey. And I was stunned in a lot of ways. We had to have multiple services because the kids wanted one in San Luis Obispo, our hometown in Newport Beach. We had a Catholic vigil and a Catholic funeral mass the next day. And then after that, we had to fly back to Kansas City, which was our old hometown where our families were, and do that again. And I like to say I stood on Spencer's shoulders because I spoke at every service. It was a learning experience too, just to see the incredible generosity of our hometown, and the way people turned out and the stories that came out from Spencer's friends and so forth. But
yeah, I appreciate that. I'd love to know a little bit more about the other people in your life. So, your parents, like your children, your spouse, who were the other characters in your life and in Spencer's life?
Well, my wife, Denise, we'd been married 31 years at that point. 2 daughters. Spencer was in the middle. So his older sister, Mary Ann, was living in New York City when that happened. And the younger sister, Stephanie, was a senior in high school. And then my parents lived in the Kansas City area, and lots of cousins. And what I always used to say about Spencer was that his sisters were his bookends. He was a comedian since he was 2 years old. He was just a natural, very funny character. And he got that from his two grandfathers, I like to say. So
that's funny. Not from you. I feel like you can.
Well, there's a little bit there. There was a conduit there, yeah. But yeah, he was just a person that was a joy to be around.
And what was your relationship like with Spencer?
Well, I found when he was 14 years old that he was an old soul. And when I say that, I'll try to make the story quick, but he'd gotten in an argument with his mother, and he came to me and he had tears in his eyes and he was upset. And I'm trying to be the dad. I'm trying to, take mom's side in the story. And he's like, Dad, hold it. Wait a second. If you want me to respect you, then I need you to listen to me and respect me. And I'm like, who's the teacher here? It's not me, So, he and I just had a very close relationship on any subject. And my single only regret in losing him was it wasn't like a lot of parents do about things I wanted to say or left unsaid or things like that. We were good on those accounts. It was just the fact that, we lost him. That was the biggest, most painful thing of all. And to this day, we still carry on some other things that in his memory.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to those
Okay.
legacy projects. But I mean, losing a son, I couldn't imagine. And so how did you process what felt right for you?
Well, it's the things I learned along the road were, to quote Rose Kennedy, a couple of things she said. One is that time does not heal. Everybody tells you it does. She said, no, it doesn't. Time is simply the scar over the wound. And that's just an appropriate description that says it so best. I've also found that grief is a hole in our lives that never truly refills. But I'll use the word, the secret to move forward in processing is that you have to incorporate that loss into your daily life. It becomes part of who you are for the rest of your life. You have to build around that hole. And part of that process is in how you go about doing that. Ultimately, it's as in compassionate friends or anything else in life, it's helping others. And so I like to say that it's a gift from Spencer to me to take what I've learned and try to help someone else that's going through that experience in whatever little way I can. So, and how did I process it? Well, I spent a lot of time at church. One of the things I was quite shocked about in the first couple of weeks afterwards was I had no idea the level of faith that I had. And it's moments like this when you do learn. And for me, that is kind of a blessing in that I didn't, two things I didn't go through of the phases that most people you hear about from counselors, the stages of grief. I didn't have the opportunity to be in denial because I was the male in the family and I had a wife and two daughters, and I had to make all these decisions. And there were a lot of decisions that had to be made, and I made those, so that didn't happen. And I also found that I didn't go through anger that my wife was going through. And that's quite interesting. And so one of the things I learned is that these stages of grief can come in a jumbled order. They aren't necessarily, denial, anger, blah, 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 right? You don't go off this checklist. And so because each person's journey is unique to them. Each person's journey is comprised of their relationship with their loved one. It can be very complex. It can be very beautiful. It can be very distorted. And I've also found so many people talk about their regrets of conversations they didn't have and things they didn't say. And when I spoke at the very first service in San Luis Obispo, it was a sunset beachside service. And this Campus Crusade for Christ gentleman spoke. And then he said, does anybody here have anything they want to say? And my legs just kind of walked out there by him. I had no idea what I was about to say. But the thing I said to this young audience of college students was I said, each and every one of you have an opportunity today to fix something in a relationship, whether it's your parents, a friend, or someone. And don't do it with a text. Don't do it with an email. Call them and try to make peace, because that's an opportunity you have today that you might not have tomorrow. And I don't know where that came from, but it was just what I said that evening. And I think that's profoundly accurate. Every single day in our lives, we don't know whether we're going to have every opportunity going forward.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely. I think one of the things that's, unique in your story is the two funerals, or I just find that really hard because when I woke up the day of my dad's funeral, I knew it was going to be the hardest day of my life, and to have to relive that more than once. I understand the concept, being there and allowing everybody to grieve and pay their respects and honor Spencer. How did you navigate that? How did you navigate the two funerals?
There were 5, actually.
5 funerals. I apologize.
Yeah, there were 2 vigils and a beachside service and then 2 funeral masses. But how did I navigate it? Well, it truly was a celebration of Spencer's life. And there were so many of his friends that spoke in the various places. His childhood friends, his college friends, his cousins and people. And at the very last service in Kansas City, we had both came from very large families. And so there were, I don't know, 300 or 400 people at this last service. And when it was over, one of my dear friends from college said, "This must be the worst day of your life." And I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "This has been a beautiful celebration of Spencer. I don't want it to end." That was more about just honoring him. And I also learned a lot more from other stories, about him through that process. But I also learned about human nature, the kindness in people and, the things people say. And one of the great cards I received was from a lady that I knew back in Kansas City. And it said, we cannot possibly hurt the way we hurt without first loving the way we love. And I'm like, okay, I get that. That makes sense. Because what you are trying to do in your first early stages of all this is you're trying to make sense of things, and this incredibly deep, deep, deep pain. And that's where you realize that's just simply love that's been thrown into reverse. And it's understanding love, and it's, understanding so many things about love. And, faith is a big part of that. But,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that quote in that letter. That's super impactful. You mentioned faith, but you also mentioned the stages of grief and how everybody grieves a little bit differently. So talk about your experience with that. I mean, obviously you had Spencer's sisters who were his bookends, who were super young, a senior in high school. Like, I couldn't imagine losing a brother at that age. And so talk about the way, you don't have to tell their story, but how the way your family grieved and how everybody grieves a little bit differently.
well, that's all four of us grieved entirely differently. For me, I'm a very open person. I like to talk. I like to share. I can say honestly, there's never been a day in those almost 20 years where I haven't told somebody a Spencer story or shared something about him or talked to my family about him. My wife was at the complete other end of that. She stayed angry and stayed almost like in a victim nature for about 10 years, which is unfortunate. I think she was angry at God and didn't know how to say that, or couldn't feel like she could say that. And so we were going down very different paths. And you just have to try to be there for your partner, be there. But as someone explained to me one day, a marriage and the loss of a child is like a ceramic piece of pottery sitting on the edge of the table that falls on the floor. And it falls into 100 pieces. And the only way you can put it back together is the two people working hard together to make that happen. And it takes years. And very unfortunately, in our case, we didn't survive that. And you hear those stories, and I could talk about the reasons and everything else, but that's kind of a different subject. My daughters, my oldest daughter was already out of college and living in New York, and she processed it herself, but she kind of delayed her processing for a couple of years. I like to say, in my wife's case and in my older daughter's case, a little bit like this. They tried to put their grief in a shoebox, put the lid on it, take a string and tie it around it and put a bow on it, and not take that box and put it on the top shelf of the closet and close the door. And that doesn't work, for me or for most people. And that's where you hear these stories about people get to cliffs, or they have these just waves of stuff. And how you can handle those is how you process your grief and try to understand it. And everybody's just trying to learn. I like to help people when I'm asked to meet with people, talk about things like breathing, in the early days. I mean, everything is so hard. And then processing what other people have to say. And then I call those platitudes.
Yeah. Do you want to dive into some of those platitudes and
sure,
what you hear, what you've heard, and how it typically either makes you feel or makes the grieving person feel?
Well, the profound thing about what other people say is that there's only one thing people can say, and that's that I'm just so sorry. And then they need to learn to stop right there and listen. Because the one thing you can do to help somebody that's grieving is listen. Just sit with them. And then platitudes, if I had a group of 10 parents that lost children sitting here, and I would bring up a platitude like, well, it's been 6 months, isn't it time for you to get over it? They would all start laughing. If I told them that some of us heard things like, well, I know exactly how you feel because my cat died. Every one of us have heard those kind of silly platitudes. Or it's like, well, you have two other children. You should be fine, you know? And it's because people don't know what to say. So they rely on this reservoir of platitudes. And well, that's one of the things I try to say to people that are new in their grief journey is just how to deal with those. You just have to let them roll over, go right on by, um, and protect yourself a little bit from it because they're well intended, but stuff just doesn't come out right.
Yeah. And I think in society, part of the reason of the podcast is people don't know what to say, and people aren't okay with silence. When you're aren't okay with silence or those awkward pauses when you are with a griever, and so someone who is grieving, and so it's okay to say I'm sorry, maybe ask a question about their person, or just be quiet, and listen. And we call it at experience camp sitting in the mud. You're sitting in the mud with somebody you don't have to do or fix. There's no way you can fix anything.
When when I get a call from somebody saying, like, whether it's, my neighbor's child died or something, what do I say? And I tell them just kind of what we just talked about. But I also say, I'd like for you to promise me right here today, right now, that for the next 6 months, you will go and sit with that person at least once a month for an hour and just listen. And because one of the things when you're going through the grieving process is in the first month, everybody's there. They bring food, they bring flowers, they stop by. But then all of a sudden, the cards stop coming in the mail. The friends stop coming by because they've gone on about their lives. They're back to normal. Everything is going their way. And for someone in grief, you're just sitting there. You're alone, or you're with the two of you, and it's just a struggle. And so that's where people need to realize the one thing they can do is listen and go sit with someone. And it is really, really helpful.
Yeah.
People need to talk and process it.
It's super interesting because I'm connecting the dots here. So when you talked about the 5 funeral and services that you had for Spencer, and the fact that you said you didn't want it to end, that was, we call what you just described a second ago as the grief cliff. All of a sudden, people are supporting, they're making you food, they're helping out, and then all of a sudden, the 3-week or the 6-week mark comes and everybody sort of disappears, and now you're set to face it. And the 5 funerals sort of, you don't want it to end because that's your connection to your person, and everybody is there around you, and then all of a sudden everybody leaves, and it's just like, all right, I have to address what's in that shoebox on the top shelf.
Exactly.
Rich, was there a moment in your journey where everything shifted for you?
I would say there were gradual moments in the process. When Spence died, he was in a fraternity, and I got a lot of his stuff, and I started going through and reading, a lot of his things and what his fraternity was founded on. And so about 6 months after Spencer died, they wanted to have another service at the campus at Cal Poly. And the university awarded us his diploma, even though he hadn't quite graduated. And it turns out he was very close to the chairman of the history department at Cal Poly, and he kind of emceed this program. And to this day, he still sponsors a scholarship in Spencer's name annually. And afterwards, we had this I'll call it a party, a gathering at their fraternity house, and one of the guys was very close to him. Just made this comment kind of in passing. He said, Spencer Wood is a lifestyle. And so that moment stuck. And now 20 years later, we have this scholarship that's given every year, and it's called the Lifestyle Scholarship. And it's all about kindness. and it's a very unique scholarship in that you can't apply for it. You have to be anonymously nominated by one of the brothers based on a written description of the acts of kindness of this person, how they live their life. And it's that, yeah, it was a moment where it's like, wow, that really struck. And so we started out building that scholarship, giving out that award every year at Cal Poly. And I just got back from last weekend giving the most recent one. And I was kind of warned from people that said, well, once all his friends that knew him are out of college, that scholarship will probably fade away. And it hasn't. And it's less about Spencer. I like to say it's much less about him personally, as it is so much more about exactly what he would want the scholarship to be about.
Yeah, what he represented.
Right. And it's also a way to see his, as I say, his mojo still lives on, touching people and doing that. And so, that was something that it evolved. And other parents can do similar things like that. I will tell you, it's a lot of work
for sure
to keep it going, and raising money.
Just sorry, continue.
That's right.
No, feel free to continue. And also, I'd love to hear, what type of person who won the scholarship this year, and what was your speech about. And trust me when you say it's a lot of work, I understand. On Monday this past week, I hosted a charity golf tournament in honor of my dad and to raise money for our experience camps organization that we're a part of. And it's a lot of work. And then when the day comes around and you see the community that gathers, and the money that you have the ability to raise to support something that resonates with you and the passions of your person, it makes it all worth it. It makes you feel like, at least it made me feel like that my dad his energy was still in the room. His mojo, as you said, was still in the room.
Well, the scholarship we give, it's called the Lifestyle Scholarship, and his fraternity has a code that was written 45 years ago, and it's basically it's how to be a good human being. That's what it gets down to, and kindness is the core to that. And you can find kindness in the Bible. You can find kindness anywhere. It's just the way people should live. But to do it, I started this out when I first started speaking at his fraternity many years ago. And I said, let's start with this. If each of you would make it a point to do a simple act of kindness every day, and I'm talking about holding the door for someone, taking a grocery cart for a lady at the grocery store. If you just, whatever it is you do, but if I have 30 people in the room and each of us do that once a day for 30 days, we've done 900 simple acts of kindness. But if you do that every single day, it changes who you are. You do it naturally. And that's what really shows when people can do that. And that's part of the speech I give, is just about, the gifts that they've been given to be in that university, to be around the kind of people they have. Life is about relationships. I think Peter talked about that. Life is all about relationships. It truly is. And it's the depth of those relationships that matter the most. And relationships are based on kindness and giving. And the more we give, the more we receive. It goes down that path. But I think what I'm talking about is also a healing process for anybody grieving. To begin to get out of yourself, it's find a way to try to help other people that are grieving. And whatever your passion is, take that passion and put it into, your efforts with other people. And it's not hard. It's whether you just go down the street or whether you get involved as a volunteer. You have to find something to do with yourself.
Mm.
So, think it's just so important. Um,
Yeah, I think something to fill that void that makes you feel, as the kids say, some type of way. Makes you feel very fulfilled, happy that that person's there guiding you. They would be happy or honor what you're doing, the actions that you're taking. And I love that the random acts of kindness throughout the day and that compound interest is one a day in 30 days. You have 30 acts of kindness throughout a lifetime. It just builds and builds and builds, and that's what creates a spectacular human being. Rich, as we transition here a little bit, you mentioned a number of decisions that you had to make, being Spencer's father and the father figure of the family. What role did you take on in your family after Spencer's death, and what were some of those challenging decisions that you had to make?
well, first understanding that each of us is grieving completely differently, and to try to be the lack of a better word, the shepherd of just trying to keep my arms around, my family and try to support them and listen to them and realize that I'm grieving too. But as one of my daughters said one day, Dad, we need you too. We know you and Mom lost a son, but we lost a brother. You know, don't leave us out in the cold. You know, they they felt like naturally that I realized I wasn't giving enough time and attention to both of them.
I want to ask a question on that. Like, how do you balance that? How do you balance your own grief while also trying to honor how your daughters are grieving and how giving them the attention and the love that they deserve?
Well, that's it's a fair question, but it's also a tough one that I don't, you just do your best. You just try to spend time with them. Going for walks was something that I found to be very, very helpful. Um, you know, Stephanie was beginning her senior year in high school, so she was very, very involved. She was president of the student body. She was in this program called the International Baccalaureate, which is you take all AP classes, and she just immersed herself in her activities and being involved. And lucky for her, she had gone out to Cal Poly about a month before Spencer died just to look at the school. And so she felt, that was like a special gift for her just to be with him and be with his friends. And Mary Ann was different. She was headed back to New York, so I didn't get to spend as much one-on-one time with her. We just talked to her a lot on the phone. Um, and, she struggled much harder than her younger sister did for a while. And then my wife, I just on a daily basis, just tried to, you know, realize that as someone once described us, and as parents that lose a child, you're like two wounded tigers that you're severely wounded, and yet your role is to try to take care of each other, which is it's almost impossible, but you try. Um, and spend time with other people and do things, but it's in those quiet moments where it's the hardest. you know so you do try, and obviously I didn't do a great job in that one respect because I you know um, wasn't able to keep it together. So you know
I think so. What you're alluding to is the ending up splitting up from your wife, Spencer's mom. Um, I would say, I don't know the extent of your situation, but it's really hard to blame yourself in that. Um, for anybody who's has lost a child and navigating, marriage after loss, do you have advice on whether to stay together for the right reasons or the wrong reasons?
um, Yeah, I could probably talk for a long time about that. I mean, um, you, that's a tough one. Um, years later, you look back and you say, well, perhaps, I should have, just hung in there. But ours was to a point that it ended up getting kind of toxic. Um, and if you're going through grief, you're supposed to be trying to heal yourself, heal and advice. I don't know. I don't know that you might think I'd be the one to give that, but I'll pass on that one, I think.
That's perfectly fair. Um, I want to change gears just a little bit to your parents. And so your parents died soon after Spencer, within a couple of years. And so what was your relationship with your parents, and what role did you take on after your mom and dad's death?
Well, my mother had a major stroke in 2002, and we basically lost about 70% of her from that stroke. And she had to learn to talk and walk again. Um, and I happened to be able to be there and spend a lot of time with her. Um, my dad gladly let me take mom to the doctor many times. And after she died in 2007, I realized I'd taken her 130 times, which meant a gait belt transfer 4 times with each time we did that, from her wheelchair into the car, out of the back in the wheelchair to the doctor's office, blah, blah, blah. And for me, those are just acts of love, taking care of my mom. Um, and unfortunately, she had a frontal brain stroke, which meant she had compulsive eating problems. She would just grab any food anywhere. And this beautiful lady put on 80 pounds, and by the time she died, and it was very tough. But and I was there when in the hospital she got double pneumonia when she passed away, and my sister arrived about 4 minutes before mom died. And my sister is a doctor, and she and my mother were also very close. But I will say this from a perspective standpoint, and I had a wonderful relationship with my mom, um, great one. And but when my mom died, it wasn't even like a blip on a screen in compared to the level 10 earthquake of losing Spencer was. And some of that's the unexpected loss. But I've worked with a lot of parents from different things, and whether it's car accidents or cancer or suicide, which is the most difficult one for parents to go through. Um, Everyone is different, but it's not fair to say that one is worse than the other, because it's ultimately the loss of a child. And people always say, it's parents aren't supposed to bury children. And I heard that about 5 times. And I finally thought to myself, you know what? Both of my grandmothers were born in the 1800s, one in 1879 and the other one in 1898. And in those days, every family lost children because they'd lose them from the measles, they'd lose them from smallpox, they'd lose them from a bad cold. And so I just felt like, we're very blessed in this world today where we have modern medicine. And today it's not so much the same, but in not too many lifetimes ago, every family buried children.
Right. Right. No, it's so true to put it into that perspective. Um, and then your dad, what was your relationship like with your dad? And, what was, yeah, your role that you had to take on after your dad died?
Well, I too was his caretaker. Um, and my dad's mind was sharp as a tack the day he drew his last breath. He was a World War II vet. And as he said, when he got home from the war, he sat down at his mom's dining room table at 155 pounds and got up at 220. And so he was overweight the rest of his life. But, and ultimately that caused him some health issues. But he lived to be 89. Okay. And, I also was with him when he drew his last breath, and he went out on his terms. He was a very strong-willed character. And I just,
Yeah. Were there any I love the stories, the way you described both of your parents and Spencer. Were there any like immediate action steps, logistics that you as a caretaker had to you know, act on, make decisions on for them?
well, yeah, in both cases, I had to deal with make the decision about what to do with their bodies. And when Spence died, my sister suggested that there was a hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, that you can donate someone's body for research, and they keep it for 6 weeks, and then they cremate them and send you the remains. And we thought about that for a while. I mean, a couple of hours, and we just said, yeah, let's do that. So um, we had never, not in our family, nobody had ever been cremated up until that point. And so when mom and dad died, they both wanted to be cremated. So I helped get that process done, help organize things. In dad's case, taking care of the estate, the family possessions. Even though I was the youngest of three sons, my sister and I were both the administrators, and of his estate, and deal with those things. And that unfortunately got kind of difficult with two brothers that hadn't been around, but all of a sudden wanted their portion of things, and they wanted it yesterday. And you deal with those kinds of things, and that was very, like I said, very unfortunate in our family. But to me, they were just basic, simple things, taking care of their affairs and cleaning it all up. So I don't know that I don't have any words of wisdom to offer anybody as far as dealing with that stuff.
Yeah. Well, what's one thing people need to know about the decisions and the logistics in the state administration after loss?
Well, always get advice from people you trust. Try not to make critical decisions totally on your own. You make the best decisions you can with the facts that you have in your hands on the time you make them. But I heard that one thing over and over and over again, and that was, don't make any major decisions in the first year about anything. And I think there's reasons why that's said. So I don't have anything specific there. If I could share something real quick, kind of to summarize some things. I always loved C.S. Lewis, and he wrote a book after his wife passed away called A Grief Observed. And I'm just going to read real quick a paragraph from it here. And he says, bereavement is a universal and integral part of our experience of love. It follows marriage as normally as autumn follows summer. It is not a truncation of the process, but one of its phases. Not an interruption of the dance, but the next figure. True love is neither physical nor romantic. True love is an acceptance of all that is, has been, will be, and will not be. Life isn't about how to survive the storm, but how to dance in the rain. And those words are so profound, and that's why C.S. Lewis is still regarded as such a great writer. And I find so much in there, in those words, that it's, when you lose somebody, you realize perhaps whether it's your parents or a child, it wasn't as perfect as you would have liked it to have been necessarily. But also learn the lesson that, you do have the opportunity to make things better with people while they're still alive, and that's just such an important part of it. But to me, love is the most powerful energy in the world. It does not die. It does not cease to exist when somebody dies. So when I hear somebody today say, my brother died last week and I loved him, with that ed on the end of that, loved. And I'm like, no, you don't stop. That's not how it is. It keeps
Right.
right on going. It
Yeah.
just it just changes forms. And it's just, that's the hardest part of all, is understanding the grief process. Understanding, is this supposed to end in a certain period of time? And and the reality is it doesn't. Things do get better. You do process it. The analogy I love is that our lives are like tapestries, and we're constantly weaving our tapestries of our life. And to me, one of the brightest pieces of my tapestry will always be Spencer and my kid. Um, and you would think that death would be the darkest part. Well, in some ways it is, but in other parts it's not. So that's why each one of us, we have our own story to tell and our own story to share. Um, and for me, faith was a critical part of getting through it, and not falling into the areas where you can just go down a dark hole and not recover. Um,
Yeah. I do want to just double click on a couple things that you said. Um, my speech on Monday at my charity golf tournament in honor of my dad, was part of it was, we're not perfect when we're born, and we're not perfect when we leave this earth. And death is far from perfect, as like somebody who's grieving the loss and heir, the person who's remaining behind to feel those feelings of loss. And so, one of the things that stood out to me from the quote is accepting that, accepting the imperfections of life, accepting the imperfections of the people, the person, accepting the imperfections of how you feel. Maybe you should think you feel sad and you're actually, happy. Maybe you think you should be happy, and because it's been, it's a number of years and you're still sad. That's okay. It's okay to feel those feelings. And then, the fact that love is the most powerful energy very much stood out to me from what you were saying.
well, I think I just remember in the early days, I said the word hope one time to my wife, and it made her furious. And she said, "How can there be hope? There is no hope." And it's like, what, there has to be hope. And it's, I like to say, when someone dies, it's where the rubber meets the road with your faith. Do you really, really, really believe in heaven? And the answer is, well, none of us know for certain about certain things, but if you've ever been to Rome, or go to major cathedrals, or see the world of art and art history, it's all about faith. A lot of it about religion. And the story my dad used to say, and I like this the best, and that's that uh, I'd rather live my life believing in heaven than get to the end of my life and the train's getting ready to take off and find out I was wrong and I'm disappointed, than being the person that lives their life with no faith and no belief, and they get to that train station and the train takes off without them because they hadn't lived that way. Uh, so faith, hope, and love are just, they're the pillars of everything, and they're tied together. So,
Rich, as we near the end of the podcast here, I want to ask you just a couple of grief related questions and advice and takeaways that you have. So, you mentioned compassionate friends. What resources helped you through your grief and loss outside of, well, including your faith and the church, but outside of it as well?
well, whatever groups they have, whether that's just friends, bridge clubs, golfing people, whatever. It's those connections were always important, but when you're grieving, you're twice as important. Relationships that you have, and if you need to meet new people, there are groups to do that. but stay active, communicate with people, share your feelings a lot, ask questions, um, but if you spend time with other people that are also grieving, it's just an amazing healing process to sit with other people. I help lead grief groups at our Catholic church, and one of the things we do when we have these sessions is we make sure that half the time is allowed where people can break up in groups of 3 or 4 and sit and just talk to each other about their stories. And they find that that's immensely healing to just listen to somebody else's story, find out where somebody else is. So you can measure where you are against where somebody else is in their process. And,
Yeah. And you
it,
can see somebody who's gone through it a little bit further than you to say, oh, wow, like, there is hope. There is somebody who's gone through it in a positive way. Or
yeah,
maybe you can understand that it's going to be still hard no matter how far down the line you are.
well, it doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't. And, you try to put some balance into your life, which is almost impossible in the first couple of years. But you do realize whether you want to or not, you have to incorporate that into who you are because it becomes who you are. It is a very big part of who you are.
Yeah.
And it just understanding that. And, I know whether it's a parent or a child or a good friend, the hardest part is when time goes on and life goes on, but for you, you're stuck, you're stopped. Your life stopped, at that moment. It feels like anyway.
Definitely. No, definitely. How has this experience changed the way you approach your own life, death, and planning?
I'll use a conversation I shared with our top priest at our church, and he was asking me something one time about death for people that have especially lost children.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, I have no fear of death. I've already experienced it. When there's a part of me that's already gone, a part of my flesh and blood that I believe is in heaven, it's already there. So it's just, for me, the point is I'm between these two linear points right now where I am alive. And hopefully we're all, be sitting with him again on a park bench someday,
Mm-hmm.
But so I don't know if I answered that.
Yeah. Is there part of your life where you live, not being afraid of death? Are you, super adventurous? Do you live just incredibly intentionally and with those acts of kindness, that lifestyle that Spencer lived? Has anything else changed in your life and your approach?
I think it changed me quite a bit. But also age changes you too.
Hmm.
My dad used to say, being the character he was, he said, age has done a hell of a lot more for my morals than old age has done a lot more for my morals than anything I learned in church ever did. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
you mellow, you get older, but, I try to stay active. I'm involved in a number of different things. We still like to travel.
Great.
We have the opportunity to do that. But the most important thing for me right now, one of the most important things, I have 7 grandkids, and they range in age from almost 3, some twin girls that are almost 3, to a 13-year-old, and they're, some of them are an 8-hour drive away down in San Diego, and other ones are out in Davis. But we love to tell. My daughters love to tell, and I love to tell Spencer stories. To all the grandkids, and we have 6 girls and 1 boy, and guess who he looks like? He looks like Spencer. So,
Of course.
pretty fun. But,
That's beautiful.
you know, um, age isn't easy. Life isn't easy, but, you know, trying to stay active. I'm told regularly that I don't work out nearly as much as I should, you know,
Mhm.
and I don't disagree. I think that's accurate. But got a dog that makes us take him for a walk on a regular basis, and talking to my daughters regularly, and you know, trying to live the life of kindness is, it's easier to say it than it is to do it.
Right, of course.
It isn't that hard to do either.
Mhm.
You know, I, I I'm known to get on an elevator with complete strangers and start up a conversation with somebody I'll never see again. 15 seconds. I get a
Same,
kick out of that. It's just fun.
of
So
course. Yeah. Well, Rich, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. As we wrap up, I have one final question. I want you to just imagine that you're talking to a young family who, or a family in general, who experienced the loss of a son. Understanding what you've gone through, what you've been through, and the journey that you've been on. What grief mantras or words of wisdom would you like to leave that family, our audience, with in their battle?
they're only gone physically. They're in your hearts forever. And let that reside. Let them be there. Talk to them on a regular basis. You don't have to hear the words back, but you can, spend time with them. You know, your memories are the greatest things you have. And if it's of a child, dwell on all the positive things. Remember all the good stories. For me, that's always been pretty easy to forget the negatives and try to stay in the positives. Some people, it's just the opposite. They remember when somebody got in trouble or did this or that. But, um, just sit and percolate with all the reasons why you love that person so much, you know.
For sure. That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. And um, thank you so much for joining me on the currency of grief today.
Well, thank you. I hope it was something I said that somebody picked up in there along the way.
I definitely think there's a number of quotes that stood out to me, and I'm sure will stand out to our audience. And I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Thank you, Richard, and thank you so much, Currency of Grief family. Don't forget, it's a great day to have a great day. So go have a great day. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Currency of Grief podcast. My hope is that today's conversation brought you clarity, comfort, and even a spark to start those difficult but necessary conversations in your own life. If you found this episode helpful, it would mean the world to me if you would share it with one other person who you feel this podcast could impact. And please, take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. Your review will help us reach more people who need this resource. Remember, the best time to talk about death and money was yesterday. The second best time is now. Until next time, I'm Justin Weidenfeld, your Grief Financial Officer, and this has been the Currency of Grief podcast.